story. But um, oh, I know it has to do with this thing. Um, so Lama also was there. I'd taken him to Copan for his first visit in 20 years or something. And then so he gave a talk to people. And then out of nowhere, then Rinpoche was like sitting, yeah, whole gone was full. And then he said, "Oh, Karuna, why don't you say something?" So I hadn't prepared, but I was listening to Osil. He was speaking in Tibetan. And the day before, he and I had spoken to the nunnery, which is down below. So now there are 400 nuns. And I'd spoken first, and so just before Rinpoche, and so I noticed that when Osil was speaking at to the whole monastery, the people were laughing a lot, and I couldn't follow his Tibetan, but I'm making a little bit Tibetan. And then just before Rinpoche asked me to speak, I knew what I was going to say. Then I was kind of caught off guard because I had spoken the day before at the nunnery. So I had okay, I'll just do the same story. So one of the monks came up behind me and he said, Usul just told all your jokes. This was like, well, no. And I didn't know which ones because of Tibetan. So anyway, so I had this one of these things, and for some reason I just held it. And at the end of the talk, these people came up to me and said, we didn't hear a word you said because, they don't work so well when you hold them. But anyway, uh, sort of random, huh? Okay, so this is our last class in this series, and we're going to talk about, well, with the organizers about how to do the next class. So if you have any ideas, the next series, I don't know, Tyler, do you know when we're thinking about? Okay, yeah, pay attention to the newsletter. And um, so it'd be good if people gave some feedback well, even just attending today, because we want it to become hopefully a series that will gather some momentum. And so just to review or remind why we're doing this class. Well, my motivation is that Lama Thupten Yeshe was the founder of this organization, of which we're global organization with 135 centers, 44 countries. And he started it just with his students in 1975, 1976, something like that. And so we have a big mission because the title of the organization or the name of it is the Foundation for the Preservation of the Mahayana Tradition. So our key mission is actually preserving, which can sound a little bit sort of stagnant. I'm not really in love with the word preservation. But on the other hand, preservation also means preserving an authentic, well, culture, but an authentic corpus of teachings that are 2,600 years old. And so now in the modern world, in the West, in America, Tibetan Buddhism is pretty mainstream, I guess you could say, or well known. But, as sort of a traditionalist, the challenge is that what people are receiving, is it really authentic Buddhism? And so we're lucky in the sense of the preservation for the foundation of the preservation of the Mayan tradition. If we get criticized or challenged for not having some modern approaches, which we do have, and we continue to develop, but it's always in the context, well, are we developing these modern approaches by maintaining the purity of, in this case, Tibetan Buddhist lineage? So Lama Yeshe was often referred to or was thought of as sort of a revolutionary Lama. He really very much understood what was happening in the modern, what was coming in the modern world, even though we're talking about, the 70s and the 80s. But he saw quite far in advance what was going to preserve. So what was one of the unique qualities of Lama Yeshe I found, had the great fortune to spend 9 years with him, working at Kopan, our heart monastery where everything started from, and where he lived. But often, of course, they were traveling often to the West and teaching, and centers would start around them. And but was unique when we talked about in our first class the Lama Yeshe's lineage, and Lama's Open Rinpoche's lineage. So it's very hard for me to sometimes really articulate what lineage means. You know, you can think of your family lineage. What does that mean, right? One person's or one family's lineage, you could say, is different than another family's lineage. And in the context of Tibetan Buddhist tradition, like I said, 2,600 years old, that lineage is an extremely important factor in it. Why? Because it's the lineage that preserves the purity of the teachings. Okay. And we can look at other religions that had, not to do a criticism, but you look at whether you can trust the purity of the lineage, right? Because of many disruptions and many handoffs it wasn't maybe, I don't know what happened, but we could look at that and we could sort of analyze. Now, when I think of this tradition that our two founders, Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, have established and that they promoted, we could say, or nourished, we can think that, when I think about what is that? What makes it unique? What is their lineage? And so I think if you spend some time with their teachings, you begin to get a feeling of what I think your lineage means something that's integrated with their personality. It's not, you could talk about a lineage of teachings like books and texts, right? So what's that makes that a lineage is there's sort of an unbroken continuity of a message. Yeah, that's how I'm thinking of it. And so with Lama Yeshe, why I feel sort of a sense of not urgency, but importance of trying to capture and preserve the lineage of Lama Yeshe is because of his unique style and his unique impact he still has on people, even though he's passed away in 1984. So I feel like we need to keep that preserved. We need to share that. People can benefit from that. And when I think about Lama Yeshe's lineage or Lama Yeshe's style, what was unique about his style, one of the unique things about his style, besides the incredible depth of his experience. Okay, so what we strive for that I think is something that's different than a religious approach, right? I'm using that word loosely, but a religious approach versus a spiritual approach. So in terms of a spiritual approach, I think this is really the key to Buddhist practice, Buddhist philosophy, is that it's not just a philosophy, it's a philosophy designed for practice. And we can, when we think about, some professor teaching in university teaching comparative religions or teaching Buddhism, what's the key difference for us is that person may not be a practitioner, right? They may not be Buddhist. So what they're imparting is knowledge and content. So we do that too. We can get stuck in that. But for Lama Yeshe, particularly, and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, of course, but any high Lama, practicing Lama, it's not about the content, it's about the integration of the content in one's own inner development. And if there's no inner development, if there's not a focus on inner development, that's okay, but then you're really working with the superficial level of the content. And it hasn't, as Lama used to say, it hasn't touched you. So it was so fascinating about, I'm not saying it's the only tradition, but it was so fascinating about this tradition is when that happens, when what happens is for the student, particularly us Western people, is we'll approach Buddhism often from the point of view the same way we would approach a university class or a class. We're very familiar with study, right? We have education. We've always been in sort of an educational environment. And so we approach Buddhist thought in the same way, which is natural. And in fact, that's the way to begin anyway, is to study and to get the content and learn the information and get clear on what are these unique ideas? What are the ideas that are unique? But you see, when we're studying, going through our normal education, our normal system of education, as I mentioned before, in Buddhist approach, we talk about listening, which means study. Well, it means content. Listening might mean reading a book as well, listen to podcasts, whatever. But then listening, then we talk about contemplating. Okay, so the contemplate is really where you study it. you really study it, you think about it, you talk about it, you have dialogue about it. And many of these, well, the core concepts, the core ideas in Buddhist thought do take contemplation, they do take discussion, because you can't understand them at face value often, right? Particularly very deep topics that are essential in the development of us as human beings. The topics like on dependent arising, the topics on like reality, nature reality, and emptiness, karma, cause and effect. These kinds of things uh, do take a lot of study and kind of analyzing. Okay, so that's not. Then the third thing is we go from listening or studying, getting the content, to contemplating, which means like studying and analyzing. And then we go to the third one, which is meditation. And meditation means integration. It's experiential. So, as we said, the term meditation in Tibetan, I think it also comes from the Sanskrit word, means to become familiar with. To become familiar with in this context means to integrate. So it's to become familiar with in our own experience. So it's not, and I have to say, I know a lot of my friends, probably myself included, we don't often get beyond the contemplation stage. We don't really get to the experiential stage. I mean, there is of course experience, but where the experiential stage becomes the main focus of the development. So when you begin to practice meditation, it doesn't, we don't have to limit it to the practice of meditation per se. Sometimes I think it's better to say the practice of mind training, because that's the purpose of meditation. That's the purpose of study, and that's the purpose of listening. Is all comes down to training the mind. Okay. And this was what Lama Yeshe's focus was. He really wanted people to understand these universal concepts, these principles. These are universal principles. And of course, different cultures make them into religious principles, right? Because that's just how we are. Okay. So sometimes I think it's good to read and listen to Lama Yeshe's and listen to different lamas and look at their different presentations, you know. And especially if they're, um, well, I can't say if they're speaking from experience or not. We don't know, right? Um, we can't say because we can't say. But a certain point, when a teacher touches your heart in a profound way, it's probably because of a couple things. Probably it's because your connection with that person, but also that person's experience of these ideas. When you meet a teacher who's speaking from their experience, you get a very different experience yourself. It's not to dismiss having a class or teachings or class or instruction on content. We need the content, but at a certain point, it has to come into experience. And when you feel, sometimes we feel a connection with a particular teacher, there has to be, not has to be, but when it comes down to the level that that teacher, whether it's woman or man, it doesn't matter. A lot of teachers are men, but that doesn't mean that's, I don't know. That's just maybe that's cultural. I don't know. Um, uh, that beyond the words of the teachings, okay, beyond the words, something will happen. Where there is some sort of exchange of energy or understanding. And that comes more so with a teacher who has experience. Can happen if, now, it can happen with a teacher who might not have a lot of experience, but from your side, you're relating to that person as, someone like, like you're receiving teachings from an awakened being. So that's your luxury, you know, right? Because even they're awakened or not awakened, if you see them that way, but sometimes that's a little dangerous because you might fantasize something on that person or project something on that person that isn't there. It's not like that. It's more as we develop our own practice, when we go through the world, we begin to see everything as our teacher. But it doesn't mean that person is the teacher, right? You know what I mean? It's because of the purity of our mind and our experience and the way we see the world, we then begin, everyone becomes our teacher. But that also comes from having a deep experience, some experience with with His Holiness Dalai Lama. If you can have that experience, or Lama Yeshe, Lama Zopa, these other great lamas. If you and there's not many of them, by the way. It's really just almost can't, it's uncountable how few there are in terms of how many people on the planet? 8 billion? Yeah, so we're talking yeah, 9 billion. I mean, what even that means, and then, then we think about, well, how many of 9 billion are uh, experiencing and developing their inner potential? So, what defines a spiritual practitioner, in my belief, spiritual person, is someone who is has made a shift. You know, the word for Buddhist, remember, in Tibetan is Nangpa, which means inner being. So traditionally, that started. Traditionally it started in a way that isn't the way that I like to explain it. So uh, traditionally, it was a term for the gatekeeper at the monasteries who had to check, if you wanted to come in and live or visit, he would do a little debate with you, and then that he was called the inner being, and to see if you were, anyway, it's like that. So it's a culture, but extrapolating on it, inner being really, I think, is appropriate for the term Buddhist, and maybe we should start using that word instead of Buddhist, which is Sanskrit, not English, right? So inner being is someone who is focusing. So right now, you and I are focusing, everything almost entirely is on the outer. Everything is on the outer. Our hearing, our vision, our smell, our taste, our tactile, which is where the cameras that we experience the world from, along with the brain or the mind itself. It's all focused on outer. So if I have a problem with someone, you know, it's the someone, right? It's the outer. Now, of course, we're not just there. We always start thinking, oh, what's my problem? And I should, we do have a little bit of that, but we're not very skilled at that, from the Buddhist understanding of psychology, we use a wrong psychology and even understanding the inner part. It's just a little bit helpful, but it isn't curative, if you know what I mean. Maybe not. So we're outer beings. So problems that arise, or like you take climate change, environmental problems. You take these kinds of things, political problems, this conflicts that are happening politically. And I'm not saying I'm as bad as everyone else, but when you think about the default mode of how we're going to solve these political problems, we think outwardly, right? Yeah, we got to change this law. We got to stand up here. We got to fight there. And that's okay. I mean, and it's not to dismiss that. We have to do that. It's better if we do it with more compassion and wisdom than and we are doing for those. But the point of the spiritual person understands that that whole creation of that problem is differently defined or understood than the way we do. Okay? You know, we'll look at the trend in right-wing politics or as something that's happening out because of out there, right? Because of out there. And from the spiritual point of view, from the inner point of view, the because is not from out there. It's weird. The because is from in here. It's something to do with the inner workings of the human beings that have created that situation. Okay? That's a very different approach. So when we analyze it further, the inner approach, sometimes, no matter what you do, it doesn't change out there, does it? So from the Buddhist point of view, the inner point of view, that's because the inner working, the inner causes of the connected beings hasn't changed. That's when we think of great individuals like Martin Luther King or Mahatma Gandhi. It's only Dalai Lama that take a, that have a nonviolent approach. It changes, it changes that inner psychology so that you stop the perpetuation. You have a chance, I should say, to stop the perpetuation of the actual causes that are creating that discord. So the discord in the world, well, this is our country today. So from the Buddhist point of view, it's really tough. It's really hard to commit to it. But but this is where study comes in. Okay, this is where we go back to listening, contemplating, and then meditating. Is we begin to understand that in the Buddhist context, the world is explained very differently. The world is explained very different. It's not a different world, but explained differently. You know, your white shirt is still a white shirt, but the way it's understood is understood differently. What makes your shirt white? Okay, so we would say, okay, what makes her shirt white is the color, the cotton and the colors, the dyes, right? We see all that, right? It's a simple, and that's what we do with everything, right? That's what we do then when we talk about the political discord, we'll do the same thing. It's just more complex, but it's the same dynamic. But now the question is, your white shirt, where is the experience of the white shirt? So we're outer beings, right? And we'll say the experience of her white shirt is over there for me, right? Experience is over there. And that's the way I see everything. I see Donald Trump over there, you know. I see the fascists over there. I see the climate change over there. It's all over there. And then I get upset by it. That's in here, okay? The upset, I accept. But you see, the whole idea of the white shirt being over there is a misconception. It doesn't exist over there the way we think it does. And we go throughout our entire life like that. Okay? And it gets really kind of, it becomes quite profound because you start feeling that way with everything, even your conflict with people or your warmth with people. The warmth and affection you feel with someone, we see as that person, right? But when we begin to study, contemplate, and meditate, what we're meditating and contemplating on is our psychology, is the reality of this moment. And the reality of this moment, we say, is we're sitting here. This is the reality. We're all sitting here. It's Sunday morning. That's not the real. That is not reality. And does it make a difference or not? Does it make a difference? The difference here is that I believe this is the reality. I believe the Republican Party is doing this and the Democratic Party is doing this. I believe that the climate is doing this. I believe the pollution is doing this, right? What if it's not like that? Does it matter or not? That's the point. So, does it matter or not? So, what Lama's trying to explain to us, and I'll read something here. If all negative, this is just in the middle of a chapter. It's not far from where we left off last time. If all negative actions and unhappy feelings come from false conceptions. Okay, just that alone is what I'm talking about. Yeah, I'm unhappy with the environment. I'm unhappy with the pollution. I'm unhappy with the climate change. I'm unhappy with the congestion. I'm unhappy with the traffic. I'm unhappy when I go to Nepal because it's congested, polluted, noisy, not like it used to be. People are really great. People are amazing. But I would say I'm unhappy. The food, actually, it's really good food now, but there's also a lot of sort of the old food too. It's a third world country. If all negative actions and unhappy feelings come from false conceptions, so in Nepal or whether the climate change or here, unhappy feelings. I mean, for me personally, it might be for you. For me personally, it's distressing what's happening politically in this country. Socially, I find it. But So I'd say I'm unhappy. I mean, I'm just talking simplistically, right? Um, but if all this comes from false conceptions, you know, then the only way to overcome these actions and feelings is to purify and release our false conceptions by perceiving the right view. Perceiving the right view is not something that can just be done instinctively. It takes time to develop right conceptions and perceive the right view. So we have to first have an appreciation that maybe we're seeing things wrongly. And the other part about the appreciation that we need is there's a better way for us to be. There's a better way for us to, and a lot of times we never have that appreciation. There's something better. Usually better means maybe a little bit more like salary and better living situation. I mean, which those are real things, but that's what we're hooked on as better, and uh, doesn't guarantee that we will be better, does it? You know, I mean, all you have to do is go to a place like, anyway, anyway. But like Nepal, people don't have much, but they seem much happier. Lama Yeshe used to talk about when he come back from his tours or visits in the West, and he would say, you know, said to me, "Oh, I get so depressed when I go to America." I don't think he ever got depressed, by the way, but uh, he says because the people there, here in Nepal, we don't have much. You see, they just have their farm, small farm. They don't have much. He says, but they're happy. When I go to the West, they have so much, and they're so unhappy. So it's that sort of contradistinction that we're looking at here, and begin to challenge. Yeah, it doesn't mean that the people in Nepal weren't suffering. Of course, they're suffering. It's just a different kind, but it's also a sense of acceptance. And so their minds are more at peace, we could say. The minds are more at peace. Here in the West, the more we have, the more we expect to have. It's kind of a bit of a it's kind of a habit, right? And I have a friend Buddhist friend, who in the last couple of years lost his entire life savings. And I think he's in his late 70s or mid 70s. Yeah, and I hadn't seen him since this all happened. So I've been about a year and a half since I saw him. I was kind of nervous, like, really sorry. I'm sorry this happened. He said, "Oh no, it's the greatest thing that ever happened to me." Hear that sometimes with people like cancer who recover, by the way. It's interesting, isn't it? Our sickness, it's the greatest thing that ever happened. It's like, blows my mind because, because he said, "Oh, I had 50 years of stuff in my apartment I had to get rid of. Now I have very little to worry about." I mean, he does have a house over, roof over his head and those things. So we do need, and I'm not gonna like over romanticize this. We do need, enough to live safely. We need safety. We need safety. That's bottom line. We need safety. We need food. We need medicine. We need our health. That's bottom line. I'm not gonna like. Of course, if we don't have those things, then we have to think about whether we have to be unhappy or not, because that can be it's kind of a decision too, can't it? Yeah. It's like that book, the uh, In Love with the World. In love, was that it? In Love with the World. There's one Lama, a Mingyur Rinpoche, who at some point decided he just had to leave the monastery, and Mingyur Rinpoche comes from a family of high lamas, and so he was sheltered, and he had a very very I mean, he studied hard. Didn't mean he didn't work hard, and retreated, but he had, what would you say it? Not pampered. What would you say? Privilege? No. He was okay. He lived right down. He lived very close to where I lived in Nepal, And he decided at one point he needed to just go start wandering. And he just left in the middle of the night, didn't tell anybody, left a note, and he went on, just became homeless in Nepal and India and wandered like, well, there is a tradition of wandering yogis, wandering mendicants, like there is that tradition, and he decided he wanted to do that. And he did suffer, he struggled, but fundamentally he kept coming back and well, what he developed was this sense of contentment, being in these, sleeping on these little benches in railway stations with rats crawling all around uh, and not having food or having a little bit of food and having food and seeing someone else not having food and giving some of his food away. This whole transformation happened. He didn't have any, he didn't have, I think he left with some money. Do you remember if he, yeah, he had some money in the beginning, not like a lot, it's a couple $100 or something like that. So I think that's quite a profound story. Of course, everyone can say, yeah, but he studied for so many years and he retreated. He was young when I don't know if he was still in his 20s, I think. Do you know? 30s? Yeah. He's young though. So it wasn't like, yes, he did study. Yes, he did have I mean, it wouldn't have been much benefit, I can say. It'd been a very different kind of benefit if he didn't have this core of understanding, of these teachings that he could begin to develop and practice and explore and experiment with. Of course, we need that. It's not just, sometimes I hear about, oh, I just want to do a retreat. And so, what kind of retreat? I don't know. I just want to go and get a cabin in the woods and, read and go for walks. And, it's like, well, uh, I think sometimes we have a different idea of retreat. That can be a retreat, but retreat in the Buddhist sense means to retreat from the neurotic mind, actually, or the habitual mind. Perceiving the right view is not something that can just be done instinctively. It takes time to develop right conceptions and perceive the right view. Okay, so what is the right view? What is the wrong view? I think it's fascinating when we talk about this path that we're talking about, this Buddhist path, which Buddhist means this awakening path. Be nice to talk about in terms of awakening instead of Buddhist, right? Buddhist is a Sanskrit word. When we say Buddhist, all of us, we have an image, right? A mental image comes up, Buddhist. And I remember being a kid, and my parents went to Cambodia in Southeast Asia, and they came back with, that was my first memory of brought back a little wood, like what they call, I think they call the laughing Buddha. And so, yeah, just rub his big belly and make a wish. And that was my, that's my first introduction to Buddhism that I can remember. And yeah, so the fundamental, when Buddha attained enlightenment, I've mentioned many times that he didn't teach for 7 weeks. He thought, I can't, this is unteachable, right? It's experience. It's like, how do you explain the sensation of something sweet? You can explain it all the word, but you can't, it doesn't, you don't know what the person can experience just from the words, right? It's experiential. Sweet or love or any experience, you can't give that experience to somebody else. And then to convey that experience, we need to use these signposts called signs called words. And Krishnamurti, if you've ever read Krishnamurti, great philosopher, uh, he used to say, the sign is not the destination. So when it says Santa Cruz, it's not the destination. So all these words are signs. And Buddha thought, what use? What use? I can't explain this. It's unexplainable because it's experiential, right? So so as you know, then when he finally did teach, he didn't teach he didn't teach the experience of reality first. He taught the experience of suffering first, because he felt if we didn't really begin to have an appreciation for our situation, we wouldn't be motivated to do anything about it. And I think that's probably pretty much where most of us are at, because we're not, I'm generalizing, but we're not very motivated. We're really not very motivated. And once when you have a struggle in your life, you either get depressed or you get motivated, right? When you're really worried about paying your rent, or you're really worried about paying your bills, or you're really worried about not having enough food, some people just get depressed, which is understandable. But then it kind of like motivates. You have to do something for most of you. So I think that we're not very motivated because, often as a therapist, I could see that people seem to, people would come into therapy when they were hurting. And sad to say that change seemed to happen then. It usually wasn't, it could happen that people were feeling good about life and wanted to capitalize on that feeling, you know. But generally speaking, people were suffering. They were in pain. I think that's what I think that was his intention when he taught the first four noble truths, and the first one being the nature, the truth of suffering, or the nature of suffering. When we talk about the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, the truth that there's release or nirvana, and the truth of a path. These are called truths, but Four Noble Truths. The why noble is actually the when an individual has perception of reality, okay, which we don't have. Well, we might not have. Once you have that perception, all of a sudden, everything becomes false and is replaced by other truths. So the fact that, your shirt is white is a truth for me. Once you have insight into reality, that's not a truth anymore. That's a falsity, the way I'm seeing it. Okay. So it doesn't mean there's not a white shirt. It means the way I'm conceiving it is wrong. Okay. That makes sense? I didn't tell you how it's wrong, did I? Okay. So I'll explain. Um, the Four Noble Truths, truth of suffering, there's a cause of all this suffering or discontent or confusion. That's the second one. Third one, that there is release, there's freedom, which sometimes referred to as nirvana or enlightenment. And then there's a path. It's not just sitting there like that. There's a way to get there. That's the fourth. When a person has direct insight into reality, and I'll explain that in a second, that person then sees these four truths. So right now, you and I, not seeing that reality, we don't see that there's a truth of suffering. Okay? We don't see it. We might see that there's pain in the world, people struggle. That's not what Buddha meant. Those are manifestations of this truth. But it's like gravity. We don't see gravity. But once someone explains it to you, you have a belief in it, right? You can see it. So that's like the truth of suffering and the truth of the cause, all these things. So that individual who has direct insight into how things really are, how they really exist, automatically begins to see all these causes. Not only she or he sees the nature of this confusion, this world is in a state of confusion. Well, we think it's not, in a way. He or she sees that and at the same time perceives, see, this is what's interesting, an experience, not intellectual, perceives the causes, perceives there is a cause, let's put it that way. When you and I go through our world, we don't generally relate to things as causal. Of course, if you're stuck in traffic, you can say, well, the cause is an accident up ahead. That's not that's just physical conditions. We don't call that causes. We say that's conditions. Why is there an accident up ahead? Why today? What created that? What created that experience? That's what's meant by cause and effect. That's what's meant by karma. Karma, which often sounds like fate, is what creates the accident up ahead and that you're in it. You're stuck in traffic. But that's not how we see it, if you're like me. How we see it is, oh, that guy, was drunk and he hit the car and slashed. You know, isn't that how we describe causes? Do we ever describe causes from a mental point of view? Why am I in that traffic and you're not? Why, another way to put it, maybe a better way to put it. Why is that my experience and not your experience? And when we talk about experience, we're talking about an experiencer, okay? That experiencer, okay, which we call the self or me or the personality or the identity. It's not only that I misconceive her white shirt and every shirt here and every cushion and every chair and every person. I also perceive the subject because to have an object of experience, there needs to be a subject, right? So the experiencer. More importantly, I could say, it's not factual, but in a way we could say more importantly, it's more important to understand the falsity of the experiencer. Because I'm this, I'm that, I'm this, I'm that. Okay? I'm American, I'm a man, I'm a father, I'm a son, all these things. Those I, right? That's who I think I am. And that is also false. In the same way, the way I see the white shirt is false. How is it false? Now, that's what you were asking, right? Why do we see it as false, first of all? Okay, so how is it false? There's some different formulas that we have to work with that question. And that is the number one question and issue of all Buddhist practice. Whether you're doing water bowl offerings or prostrations or meditation or debate or study or all circumambulating stupas, mindfulness practice, oh, go on and on, right? There's no purpose to those, really, other than to create enough of the right conditions to have a direct experience of reality. Sometimes I think that people who are mentally, unstable, very unstable, I mean, it's like psychotic kind of level. Sometimes this is my own little fancy. I never heard anyone ever say this, but this is my own little fancy, is that sometimes I think that, or through psychedelics, for example, that you do have that the person does have some kind of experience of reality. Lama Yeshe used to say that, because you know, that was an era of a lot of psychedelics, and so not there's not a lot now, but I mean that was a trend there then. And he used to say, well, I think if you take LSD, it might be good for some people because people don't understand that their mind is so vast and has so much unlimited potential. And it's possible through psychedelics that you can have appreciation of that. He says, but once you have that, then you need to stop because you'll never develop that quality through the use of drugs. So he thought, yeah, the insight was great. If it came through drugs or it came through meditation, he didn't care. But then, good enough. And I think people know. I mean, I was of the generation did a lot of psychedelics, and I stopped because it just didn't get new. And there's nothing more I learned. It just became I didn't learn. I didn't develop. I mean, I feel very thankful that for me, it's like I think people read Baba Ram Dass's "Be Here Now." That was my that was my coming down from acid book late at night, and that was blew my mind. That opened up my whole universe. That book, and I quit doing drugs and all those things because of that book, or in the path. But he used to say that Ning Kurli Baba, his guru, said that you Western people are so attached to physical things that God needed to manifest in a pill. It's pretty good. So, um, so the core challenge for us in this path is to transform our mind, transform our psychology. Why? Okay, so I'll get to the heart of it is that if I am misperceiving things, then I'm misreacting to them, aren't I? So it's kind of like when you're at a David Copperfield illusion show and the Statue of Liberty disappears, right? If you believe that, then you react in a way. You get confused, you get fearful. But if you know it's just an illusion, then you have a very different experience, don't you? And when I say know it, the beginning is knowing, but you still see it. You don't. Then as you develop, you're able to actually see how he does it. That's what this path is. So what we see, what is presented to us through our five cameras, okay, and the sixth one being the mind, mental factor, is is through the eyes, the sights and colors and shapes, the through the hearing, the sounds, and through the nose, all the smells, and then again, taste and tactile. Did I say hearing? And hearing. Um, so that is all seen incorrectly, experienced incorrectly. Okay. If it's experienced incorrectly, then we react to it, right? So when we react to it, then our reaction's incorrect. And it's not going to actually lead to a solution. I mean, I'm not talking about if you're hungry and you see an apple and you eat. I'm not talking at that level. I'm talking about permanently, eternally. Because what happens the next, an hour from now, we get hungry again and do the same thing. In Buddhist path, we're talking about getting free of that neurotic habitual tendency. When Lama Yeshe used to say to me and to other people, he used to say, "You don't even know how to make a cup of tea." You know, meaning every time he made a cup of tea, it was brand new. I make a cup of tea, it's habitual. So uh, now, the way our minds work because of an almost endless habit. Okay, so the specific is this. And the way that we're talking about reality, and our challenge is we don't see reality. So we are constantly reacting to unreality and we think it's real. You know, I really think Tyler hurt my feelings. And then I react to him. And then I write him an email. And then he gets pissed off and he writes me an email back. And then we talk, well, maybe we should have coffee. Yeah, okay, we'll have coffee. What's okay? We'll meet at Pete's. No, I don't like Pete's. We'll meet at Verve. Okay, no, okay, Verve. That's a power thing, right? That's a power thing. He wants to meet at Verve because that's his place, and then he's going to have me one down. And says, so no, let's meet at what's the neutral one? Huh? Starbucks. So you meet at Starbucks. And then I say a Starbucks coffee's not very good, and he says, oh, now you're doing the power thing, and like that. We get this conflict, right? We have a whole full-blown conflict going, all because we're seeing things incorrectly, but we think are correct. So this discussion about the nature of reality, it's the core foundation of of Buddhist thought. It's the core foundation of all Buddhist practice, core foundation of all Buddhist meditation, and the core foundation of all Buddhist liberation. It is the liberating principle. And when we talk about the nature of reality, that is that is the meaning of wisdom. And in our tradition, we don't just develop compassion, which we value highly, but we talk about wisdom without compassion is like a bird trying to fly with one wing. So I know that there's other religious traditions that seem to focus mostly on compassion, and it's great. But one of the things in Buddhism is that we're not just about compassion. You have to develop wisdom. Now, development of wisdom is the development of compassion, by the way. So it's not like they're exclusive at all. And the development compassion can be the development wisdom. They go hand in hand. That's too complex for now. But um, when we talk about seeing reality, and the reality is the key, and the reality is the foundation, reality is the practice, and reality is the view of reality, the nature of reality, the view of reality is the liberation. There are, and I'm not going to get more technical than this, but well, I might. But there's four different Buddhist schools, philosophical schools that say reality is like this. This is it. And then if you understand it this way, you become liberated. And then there's another school, a little more subtle. So, well, you know, that's okay, that's right, but that's not the most subtle way. There's still some problems with that. Then there's a third one, and it says, well, good, but you have to also incorporate these other ideas, these other principles. And then there's the fourth and most subtle one that says, well, you're all right, but that's not the most subtle. Here's the most subtle. Okay. I'm not going to burden you with that. We do classes on those, but you know, you have to first become interested. Why? So I wanted to say that just fundamentally, coming from maybe those easier schools, and we can go to the complex if you want, but the easier way to just you're asking how we see things wrongly. We don't see reality, so we must see unreality. Okay. So if you take any experience of the five senses and the mental sense, when I talk about mental sense, it's the one that like when you're dreaming, okay, your ears, you're not experiencing your dreams with your ears or your eyes and that sort of thing. You're actually experiencing it with your mind, right? Or you're daydreaming, or you're thinking about your childhood home, all that kind of stuff. That's the mental sense, okay, that does that. And not again, not to go into any detail. But all of those experiences, now we start from the found basically, okay. So let's talk about three things that we see incorrectly. All of those experiences, when I say all, there's exceptions always, but generally, just for sake of simplicity, all of those, okay, there's three things we do at the fundamental level that's wrong. The first is pretty easy to understand, just scientifically. We see, and I'm using this cup as an example, we see everything as being the term in Buddhist philosophy is we see everything as permanent. Permanent. Now, permanent in our common language is usually means eternal. We don't mean eternal. We things exist eternally. Yes. By permanent, then its opposite is impermanent, right? By permanent, what we're saying is this cup is static. It's not in the nature of change. It's not moving. Okay? Impermanent, actually, development, the definition of impermanent is that which is produced. And in Buddhism, everything is defined. If you don't have a definition, it's hard to talk about it. So when I say produce, it just means, right? It's coming into this cup is not is infinitely coming in and out of production, actually, isn't it? The atoms are moving, the molecules are moving, your mind is moving. Is anything, we perceive it as static, fixed, permanent, not in production, not changing. Maybe the easiest one is change. Impermanence means change. Permanence means no change. So something that's eternal, you see, is not permanent because it's changing. We'll say like, I don't know, the sky is eternal. Well, the planet is, the sun is eternal, even though we know it's not, but it's kind of like eternal, right? But it's changing. Okay? So we don't mean eternal. The mind, actually, the mind, our minds, the mind is eternal, but it's not permanent. Is your mind changing moment to moment or not? Yeah. Is this cup changing moment to moment or not? Is her white shirt changing moment to moment or not? Right? Is my conflict with Tyler changing moment to moment? Yeah. But when I see you, when I'm upset with you, right? Or you're upset with me, or it's opposite. When I like you, when you don't like, and you like me, it's the same thing. I see Tyler as permanent when he's not. That Tyler right now is not even the same Tyler I was just talking about 20 seconds ago, right? The fact that we don't see that is what's called ignorance in Buddhist philosophy. And ignorance is the problem. What's the opposite of ignorance? Wisdom. And what wisdom are we talking about? Seeing things as they are, which means reality. The, when we talk about reality, mm, when we talk about reality, one way it can be defined is that something exists the way it appears. That's the simplest way. And what I'm arguing is that everything that we perceive does not exist the way it appears. Everything. Everything. Is that a problem? Now it becomes one. And can you see that if you did see things existing how they do, existing the way they really are, that that could be liberating? Because I'm not going to get upset with Tyler because I see how he really exists. When I get upset with him, it's because I see him as permanent. And everyone say, "Oh, no, he's not permanent." You know, I'm not talking about intellectually. I'm talking about experientially, perceptually. Is there ever a time when you, so that's one of the three that I'm going to cover real quickly today. Permanence. Okay. And that might be the only one that you really need to cover because that seems pretty easy for us to get. So when you're stuck in the traffic like that, the more upset you get and you know how your brain gets kind of, your head feels kind of tight? Maybe that's not a good example for you. Maybe it's good for me. Or you're engaged in some activity and you're just like not able to do it, or your body hurts, or you can't focus, and you get more and more tense. That's because we squeeze more and more on the permanence of it. When I'm sitting there in traffic, I'm only a mile from Porter Street. Coming from Scotts Valley. That's all fluid. There's not a single thing that's fixed in that whole experience. Even the traffic looks fixed. So, right? And I said, well, God, I got a phone call at 5, and it's 5 to 5. When I think I've got a phone call at 5, I'm seeing that as permanent. It's merely a concept, isn't it? 5 o'clock is a concept. Phone call is a concept because I'm sitting in my car down by, SoCal Avenue. Do you see this? Everything is seen as permanent. And then I think I have my phone call with Tyler. Then an image of Tyler comes up. Permanent. Phone call, permanent. I can see the flashing lights half a mile down the road where the accident is. Permanent. They're going like this, flash, flash, right? But we're seeing because our brain can do that, but we're seeing each one as permanent, fixed. We don't see the movement even between the red and the blue flashing lights. It's either red or it's blue. It's red. But even that red is coming, expanding. So excuse me, when a person develops mind training or trains the mind, the fundamental or the basic, the not even basic, the core method of training is meditation. Okay? Because meditation is designed to slow the mind down. When the mind becomes more and more focused and becomes more and more focused, that meditator does actually, I'm not being idealistic. You see the atoms and molecules moving. Not only that, you see the mind moving because your mind has become so slowed down and so fluid. So right now, my mind is not fluid because to see things concretely means my mind is also concrete. Remember we talked about it's a dependent, interdependent phenomena. So for me to see something permanent means my mind is permanent, if you know what I mean. My mind is in permanence, permanence, in permanence conception. So all these conceptions, so Tyler's a conception, 5 o'clock is a conception. The traffic, that whole thing, what is that really, what am I really experiencing? So I say, those flashing lights are down there. Where is the flashing light? Where really is the experience of the flashing lights? In your mind. The experience is not in, is, well, the experience is not in the object, because the object's sitting there. There's a lot of objects all over the place, but we're not experiencing them. Once they become experience, either they have to be in the object, in my eyeball, or in my mind. Okay? So we say all experience is in the mind. Now it is interdependent on the eyeball and the police car down there. They're interdependent. You got to have those three things. But the experience is in the mind. Okay? And the mind must be moving moment to moment for it to experience that, or else everything would be frozen. There's only two choices, frozen or fluid. Is there a third choice? But we don't see things fluidly. The meditator can. As you slow the mind down, you know, she can see that. And that's what happens in the development of these meditators, these yogis, these, spiritual beings. And all of a sudden the world can transform because, typically we often can't change the external world of us, for us. We just can't get out of poverty. We just can't get healthy. We just can't get out of the city, whatever the thing is. And it takes a lot of commitment to say that if those conditions, if you can't change the conditions, then it has to become a part where we have to change our mind. I mean, ultimately we have to anyway. But it doesn't mean don't try, of course, because it makes a difference, right? It's easier for the mind to be more at ease, in a rural environment, say, than in a ghetto. So conditions do matter, but they're not the cause. Okay, so one was permanence, right? I don't know if this is even talking about Lama Yeshe. He talks about this. Okay, so that's one thing. Well, maybe we just leave it. Well, the other two that we started at the fundamental level. Okay, so see if I can remember. Ah, yeah. The second one, which might be easier for a lot of people, is we were just talking about actually. I see this cup. You see this cup, if you're like me. I see my conflict with Tyler. I see Tyler. I see your white shirt. They all exist independently on their own. They all exist independently. What's the opposite of independent? Right. Or dependent, right? They're not the same, but for our purposes, they can be the same. Interdependent or dependent. Do you experience this cup as existing out there on its own, independently? Do you experience Tyler, my argument with him, as out there? He's over there, independently? Hmm? Do you see her white shirt over there, independently? I do. So that's false. And now we're sort of making a commitment to the truth. We're making a commitment that false is not so good. Because What happens, because I see this cup independently, because I see Tyler independently, then it drives me to act a certain way and relate a certain way. Okay? So Tyler's wearing a kind of a green olive shirt, right? With a bleach stain. And, his brown hair, fair complexion. And that's what I'm relating to. And that's what I'm having an argument with. Okay? But all of those things, now, the question is, where is his fair complexion? We think it's over there. But where's the experience of it? In my mind. And if he says something unkind, then the words are coming out. Where are the words? Where are the words? Where's the experience of the words? I say, God, he talks so rudely, right? But but it's not that he talks so rudely. The experience hits my ear and then resonates within my mind, and I create. But I don't see any of that. I just say he speaks rudely. I just say this cup's over there, independent. I don't like the color. I do like the color. That's what we do. But that's because we see these things existing outside of ourselves independently on their own. But actually, the whole experience of Tyler, the whole experience of this cup you're experiencing in your mind, aren't you? Right? So that's another false conception because it doesn't exist, it exists interdependently. Without the cup, you can't have the experience, and without your mind, you can't have the experience. Particularly without your mind and without your eyeball, and all these other, there's many, many factors that are going on just to experience this cup. How many things are going on just to have an experience of a cup, let alone an interaction with another person? It's phenomenal. It's really phenomenal. So the third one, so you get that independent. So we got permanence, we got independence. Those are two misconceptions. And I go throughout my whole day and my whole life and my countless lifetimes believing that. And then you know what I do? I kill someone because of that, right? Or I get angry at someone for doing that. I have a fight. I say something rude. I say something hurtful. All based on this misconception. You hurt me, so therefore I'm going to hurt you. And this is what's referred to as samsara, or the cycle. And it's all created by what? Ignorance of what is really there. The third one is that we don't see things in parts. We see things as monolithically existing. It's very, in a way, to me, it sometimes feels a little bit like independent, this independent thing. But the independent, this is nothing but parts, isn't it? Right? But we don't see the parts, really. I mean, this is countless parts. But way we perceive things, like, so, with example, I might have this idea of Tyler, right? He's this, he's that. But I construct that, I mold it into a little solid guy. When in fact, where's Tyler anyway? There's an ear, there's a nose, there's an eye, there's a voice, there's a sound, there's a shape, there's a skin tone, there's the sound of his voice. It's countless parts. But I don't perceive him that way. I see him as a unified whole, a monolithic whole, like this concrete black obelisk thing, right? Solid, because it's independent, it's permanent, and has no parts. When the parts are countless, because there's also my parts that I have parts. I can't interact with him if I don't have my parts, right? My feelings, my perception, my eye, the color of this resonating as a conception in my mind, right? Okay? So we're not engaged with reality. That's reality. And the meditator or the person, who's developing their mind does see things that way. And then one other complete, um, so I'm talking all about objects, right? The objective world. Then also this turns the same thing on the internal world, I, me, self. So I see myself as permanent. I don't see myself as changed. Now, someone asks you, oh, yeah, of course I'm changing. Now, today I was happy and tomorrow I'm unhappy. I change all the time. But we're not talking about that's just intellectual. We're talking about experiential. When you walk from here to your car, check out, you're walking as a permanent being. And if someone says to you, are you permanent? Oh, no, I know I'm impermanent. I'm not talking about that. Yeah, I'm changing all the time. Not talking about that. That's good. But we have to get to what we're experiencing experientially. When you walk to your car, you feeling a sense of permanence, permanent me walking to the cars, and independent. You're independent of everybody else. You're independent of the cars, the trees, right? When in fact you're not independent of any of your experience. It's all interdependency. And then the third one is you feel, or we feel like we don't have any parts. We're just this obelisk, this kind of permanent thing, unpartless unity. Like we don't have any parts. What happens when you walk to your car and you wear it's like your body parts, your arms, your neck, your hair, your head, but you're not, we're generally, I'm just talking about the body now, not the mind. But just the body we see as a unified thing too, don't we? What happens if you see, and then you're just like, wow, it's like all these parts floating through the sky. Something's holding them together, but it's countless parts, right? Put together a particular kind of way. I don't know where I'm going. Okay. I had so much I was going to read today together. Let me go. Okay. When our meditation is not going smoothly, we should not push. The mind is like a baby. Babies don't like to be pushed. We have to treat them differently. Instead of pushing them, we have to play with them in a psychologically skillful way. Then they're okay. A lot of people push, when we start meditating or meditators. We don't get it because we don't understand Lama Yeshe's lineage. And Lama Yeshe's lineage is a Buddhist lineage. It's not just him uniquely. Similarly, we have to play a little with our mind. When it becomes impossible to meditate, we should not push. Instead, we should just leave our mind where it is and do some purification practice. That means things like circumambulate or creating generosity, taking food to the food bank, or, doing water bowls, prostration. It depends on what resonates for you. Unfortunately, this will decrease obstacles and make our mind more powerful. Unfortunately, many people do try to force it. This just makes them aggressive and frustrated and angry with their friends. Quote, I don't like you this morning. I didn't have a good meditation. Instead of making me calm and clear, it made me uptight. Such people don't have skillful wisdom. They don't know how to integrate their practice. Also, every time you meditate, cultivate bodhicitta. So this is the awakening mind. This is fundamental to us in this Buddhist tradition. That we don't just do these things because I want to be happy. We do them so that we give more benefit to others. And we're not much benefit to others because we haven't developed much wisdom on how to help people. Okay, so that's the bodhicitta attitude. So when we sit down and meditate, like we come to this class, think, oh, coming to this class, I hope that some way it'll continue to have benefit for myself and others. It's really important to have the others in this practice. Okay, otherwise it becomes so self-centered. Which we see a lot of spiritual practice, so-called spiritual practice. People seem to become more and more self-centered. Than they take on just a different identity. Um, that's my opinion anyway. It doesn't. Also, every time you meditate, cultivate bodhicitta and totally dedicate your practice to others. Quote, it doesn't matter whether my meditation is good or bad. I'm not doing it for me. I'm doing it solely for the benefit of other sentient beings. Quote, end quote. If you have that kind of dedicated mind, even if your meditation is not that good, you're not disappointed. You're secure in the knowledge that whatever you did was for the benefit of others. Then, even if you're not successful, you're still relaxed. You know that you tried. You know that you tried your best, and your attitude, concern for others, rather than the selfish quote, I'm miserable, I want to be happy, therefore I'm going to meditate, is the most important thing. Meaning the attitude for others is what Lama's saying. If you meditate with self-cherishing, which means self-importance or self-absorption or self-concern, and it doesn't work, you get really disappointed. So when the more it's for me, me, I got to be happy, I got to be peaceful, I have to be calm to get through today. And then the more it doesn't work, the more angry and frustrated you get. But if you have the other idea that whatever happens is for the benefit of others, I don't care what happens to me. Okay, I can't meditate. And the thing is, there's a big trap because we didn't get to the chapter on attachment here. Maybe next time. But the trap is that people develop, just like we do develop attachment to everything. Now all of a sudden we developed, okay, I'm a spiritual practitioner, I'm a meditator, and we develop the same sense of attachment to meditation. And my experience is that with my experience with Lama Yeshe is he knew that I was very prone to that. So he kept me from meditating. He said, you work. Oh, well, I want to do this retreat. I want to do that. I want to go to this class. I want to go to that teaching. You work. I mean, it takes some great wisdom to say that to someone. You got to know. Yeah, because I think meditation. It's not. I'm not bragging. I think meditation is not the hard thing for me. Hard thing for me is working in the world with a dedicated attitude. That's harder for me. That's not hard for other people. A lot of people, yeah, a lot of people automatically gravitate towards social service and that sort of thing, or serving, working. Yeah, I'm quite lazy. Is there questions, Tyler? From the, yeah, leave. Oh, okay, thank you. Maybe so it's about 10 minutes to, is there any question, I haven't, I did too much talking. Online, anyone have any question? In the room? No? Okay. Do you want to do your microphone thing? Or I can repeat it, yeah. Right. Dynamic conflict. So the question was, what if you're transforming your attitude around, say, a conflict with somebody, but they're not, and you're still stuck in this pattern? That's what you're asking, right? You're still stuck in the same dynamic. You're not stuck in the same dynamic because it may look like it, but so the dynamic before was just you're in a conflict and you're getting pissed off and you're getting irritated and you're getting frustrated. Then what changes for you because you begin to see a little bit more the falsity of that whole interaction, the kind of the hallucinated part of that. You're not getting as frustrated, you're not getting as angry, you're not getting as sad and that kind of thing. So it's already changed. Now, it's pretty profound that we don't really have much control over other people. In fact, we have no control over other people. But if we are to exert some control, if we're able to, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen because you changed, which allows them space to change. So I remember that, I can't remember who said that. It might have been Ram Dass. You know the famous picture from the 60s of all the police, or I guess the soldiers, National Guard police, lined up with their rifle. I don't know if you remember this picture. They're in a line with the rifles, and I think it's a hippie girl putting flowers in each of the muzzles. And Ram Dass commented, "Can you imagine the dilemma of those soldiers? All of a sudden, she wasn't an enemy. She didn't see them as an enemy. That's what happens. And when you're with people who are really trying to practice, you feel that. You feel that. It's like there's a presence, you feel the presence. And of course, it doesn't always mean that the other person changes, but often it does. I mean, of course, the horrible images of the civil rights movement where, peaceful demonstrators in the South were being, attacked by dogs and hoses and stuff like that. It doesn't look like it made much change, but it did. It did. It did for them fundamentally, and also it's like His Holiness says. Some of the younger Tibetans feel that he shouldn't be such a well, there shouldn't be such a pacifist approach to the conflict with the Chinese, and the Chinese propaganda is extremely abusive and very aggressive, very violent. And His Holiness said to them, they said some of the young Tibetans say, "Well, it's just a sign of weakness, your pacifism." And he said, "You think it's a sign of weakness? You try it." Yeah. Yeah, it's just a profound way of looking at things differently, you know. I don't know if that answers your question. I think the other thing is that when we get into more deeper and profound ways of thinking about that conflict that you're having or we're having with the person, as we begin to become inner beings, and then we begin to think, how is this happening? What's happening internally that I have this conflict with this person? Why? Why me? Why isn't it the guy next to me? Why isn't it my other friend? Why is he picking on me? And he and Jack and I were doing the same thing, but he's picking on me and he loves Jack. Why? Right? That's when, as a spiritual practitioner, you begin to see, well, the causes are different, right? Because you're experiencing effects, right? You're experiencing the effects of his anger towards you. And you're experiencing the effects of your internal. Well, if there's effects, there has to be causes. Jack didn't make the causes. You did. So at the very least, that's the purification is when you begin to think differently about it. So the knee-jerk reaction to fight back or whatever it is, that's really what purification, one of the main fundamental purification practices, is not when you don't react, you don't create the same imprints anymore. You're done. You'll be done anyway. How in that moment do you stay away from self-blame, like that I messed this up? Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. So someone's angry at you, like there's three of you sitting there, and the person's not angry at your friend, but they're angry at you. And then, like, what's wrong with me? Why is he angry at me and not? Yeah. I mean, there's so many ways to answer that, but what's the cause of him being angry at you? Right. Okay, let's go slow. You could say your karma. You could say your karma, or you could say, or it's my person. That's the self-blame one, right? It's my personality. If I wasn't such a, I don't know what, if I wasn't so aggressive, he wouldn't be picking on, we wouldn't be having this fight. I mean, look at Jack. He's so mellow. That's why, that's just false. I mean, I know it looks like, I mean, those are conditions. I'm not dismissing the conditions. Jack's sitting there kind of pretty chill, and so they're not feeling it, right? So the guy's not feeling, and that's true. But why is Jack like that and you're not also? But let's go back to, fundamentally, if it's, there's a great teaching, which you're familiar with. The teachings on thought transformation talks about the object of blame. You remember that? And the object of blame, usually the object of blame, what we're saying here is Well, the object of blame is me and this person I'm having this conflict. If I was like nicer, or if I was less reactive, or I was less depressed, or less sensitive, or less all these things, right? Then I wouldn't have this conflict. See, Tyler doesn't have a conflict with this guy, and he's kind of, he's not, right? He's not irritated. That looks like all the cause, right? And those are conditions, of course. But the fact that it's happening, yes, that's more important. The fact that it's happening is due to you created the causes with that person and Tyler didn't. And that's really sad. That's just the fact. So, when you say, no, can't you still have self-blame? I created these causes. Yeah, see, I'm a mess, right? Um, this takes some study and some contemplation, but for me, at this moment, I can say, I'm not saying the moment when that conflict is happening, but I can say now in reflection, those causes were not created this lifetime. Very unlikely. You had some, I know we often refer to this spiritual bypassing term, which I can't stand. You know, when you say it's not karma, isn't that spiritual bypassing? If it is karma, if it is due to, let's not say karma, it's due to imprints. Okay, imprints on your consciousness. If you don't have those imprints, you can't have that experience with that person. Like you don't you don't have the imprints of I mean someone's having a fight with someone in downtown Santa Cruz right now. Argument. Why aren't you having that with that person? Because you don't have the imprints. All experience, see, when we begin to see the nature of reality, we just see the experience as ripening imprints and not as permanent, independent, and partless experience, which is how we're. I mean, that's the other thing. When you're sitting there and this person's yelling at you, and they're not yelling at the person next to you, there's so many things you can do. The other part is, well, you were asking specifically about how you don't go into self-blame. Well, you are to blame. But now, because we know about impermanence, the person experiencing it, is that the same person who created it? No. Interdependent, yes, but not the same. That person might have been, you know, I don't know. See, I was trying to think of something funny. Mary Poppins' last life or something. You know, it's like last life, we were a personality. I might have been a woman, I might have been Chinese, I might have been an octopus. Those are all those individual identities. That individual identity is not the identity now, is it? The identity now is this for this life. When this life ends, this identity ends. Now we don't end, meaning our mental continuum doesn't end. And your mental continuum is not my mental continuum. So there is something individual, yes, but it's not the identity. Because if it was identity, then, you'd be the same identity every lifetime. And I mean, it's amazing if we really knew our past lives. I mean, we've been dogs and cats and deer and rodents and spirits and heavenly beings, celestial beings. And when we're in those realms, in those mindsets, we feel that that's who we are. And now we're in this mindset and we feel this is who I am, but it's not permanent. So even sitting with a person having the argument or they're coming on, getting on, coming kind of going off on you, if you sat there going, "Oh, I just saw how I'm feeling hurt because I think of myself as this permanent identity and I've already changed in the last 20 seconds." Subtle, but you're not the same. This is not the same cup as 20 seconds ago. It is not. There's a continuity, yeah, until I break the cup, until we leave this life. There is a continuity, but it's not the same. And being fixed by the idea that he's yelling at me as opposed to what happens if you were just experiencing. You know, remember my story about Lama Zopa who's in the pond and or in the lake and starts to drown? That's why he didn't panic. His sense of identity is so fluid. It's the same thing. If someone's yelling at you, I've seen this before. I've seen this with my teachers and lamas that I work with, and just, simple but profound monks, and they just have these conflicts and they're not moved. And I'll finish in a minute, but it comes back to the story of why was there less PTSD amongst the survivors of the Chinese prison camps than typically found? Why? Even though they were tortured, particularly among the lamas. Why? Because they had that sense of fluidity, even in being tortured. I'm projecting some, but this is what way I make sense of it. They got tortured. Yes, they felt the pain on that, but they were looking at their tortures with compassion and maybe wisdom. So they had a different experience. They experienced themselves differently, which means they experienced the other person differently. So when you experience the other person with compassion, this is their torturers, it also means from your side, you're experiencing yourself differently. So if someone's going off on you and you're just like, you know, there's so many levels you could be experiencing. And I don't mean to be the spiritual bypassing thing, but there are people who feel grateful that this person's angry at them. And it's pretty fun. But with people we admire, and they don't they feel gratefulness. Anyway, that's a long journey. That's a lot of teachings. There's a lot of practice to get there. But just to throw that out. Okay. Anything else? Patrick, Casey, anything there? Are you still awake? Okay. There's nothing else. Tyler, nothing there? Oh yeah. Yeah. We'll go to Rinpoche. Yes. I'll remember. Oh, you read it. No, but you can't return it until you read it 3 times. That's the rule. Why don't you keep it? Because I have a copy. I have another copy. They have a copy. Who can we give it to? Leah? Somebody? Who can I give it to? Anybody need a copy? Do you have a copy? Do you have a copy, Jessica? You said Tyler. Okay. And if I go home and I find I don't have a copy, then I'll come get it. I'm just joking. Thank you. Yeah, no, give it to someone else. Yeah, thank you. Okay, you just read it once. Wow. Wow. Thank you. Well, maybe we can have a class in that book. Might be a long class, but okay, so thank you, everyone. So, Leah, do you have people's email address and stuff? Because I'd really like you to reach out to them and see what went right, what went wrong, what we can do next time. Also, the people online. And Marilyn, thank you for coming each time. And John, Pam, Patrick. Okay, so hope to see you. I think we'll start up again. I don't know when, what month. We'll be talking about it. Yeah. Yeah, I might get fired, so then. Yeah. Uh, if the mind is without beginning, it is changing. The mind is changing. It is impermanent. Mind is not permanent.
It's not, it doesn't have a beginning. That sounds like it is permanent.
No, it's eternal. Remember I mentioned in the beginning, eternal. No. Permanent means change, does not change moment to moment. Does not change, not produced. That's too technical. It doesn't change each moment. Does your mind change each moment or not?
But what about the most subtle mind that
Still impermanent. Emptiness is permanent. So the lack, I didn't explain it. So it's, but anyway, most subtle mind is impermanent. Most subtle mind leaves at the time of death. So it has to be impermanent. It means changing moment to moment doesn't mean that it ceases to exist totally. If your mind was permanent, if my mind was permanent, we couldn't attain enlightenment, could we? Could we? So because it's beginningless means it's eternal but not permanent. It's beginningless implies it's been changing forever, right? Right? Because beginning has been changing forever. And you could say space is beginningless and it doesn't change moment to moment. You could say, I understand. But in the case of the mind, it's beginningless, but it has been changing moment to moment, instant to instant, nanosecond to nanosecond. It hasn't been fixed. If it's fixed, how could we become anything? You know what I mean? We couldn't change. But yes, it is beginningless and it is endless. It's eternal. Okay?
idea that there's a atma philosophy.
Right. I don't buy that. The Atman is mentioned by that. This is what much of the debate is about. We should analyze it. Analyze what they say, Atman, soul, whatever. Look at how they define it, and then analyze whether that's possible or not. Okay, that's our job. Not just to accept it because this person says or that person. Oh, oh, honest na, honest, honest na ne. Bitra honest na. Thank you. These are old friends. Tarzan, bitra honest, bitra honest, bitra honest.